years ago when I first moved away from scrolling through presets and took my first steps into designing my own sounds, I was blown away by the amount of possibilities synths could achieve. Starting with Synth, my first love. I loved the sound of the oscillators, the intuitive layout and filter provided a wonderful way to create awesome sounding pads, leads, and chords from scratch. Soon after, however, I felt the urge to expand more, to go deeper, and that's when Massive came into play. Native Instruments Massive, with all of its amazing wavetables, seemingly endless combinations of its filters, and an amazing 4 envelopes and LFOs, was something that was just out of my wildest dreams. Years later, Serum came out, and it seemed that the sky was the limit. User wavetables, user oscillators, incredible new selection of filters, an amazing onboard effects system, including the famous OTT compression. I didn't know where I could go from there. In today's day and age, it feels like every synth that comes out has even more features, is jam-packed with more ways to produce sound, and is more and more complex. However, today I'm going to make the case that, in my humble opinion, character matters a whole lot more than features. And at the end of the day, when you're looking for a synth, this is what you should be looking for. Character, the way the sound makes you feel, over a number of features. For that reason, I truly believe that the Dave Smith OB-6, pictured above here, is one of the, if not the greatest, modern analog synthesizers. Hey Castaways, what's up? This is Devin. Thanks so much for tuning in. I know it's been a while. Remember to hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't already, and let's get started. So every single sound you just heard in that demo, except for the drums, was actually made using the OB-6. And I think that really goes to show the unique sonic character that this synth brings to the table. Now, I think 3 things in particular really add to this sound we're talking about. 1, the filter. It's an amazing filter, we'll get to it. 2, the raw tone of the oscillators. And 3, the cross mod section. So without further ado, let's check this out. Let's jump onto the panel and learn about what each function of this synth does. All right, so to start off with, we're going to initialize the preset, manual and write, and we've got a wonderful saw wave. So right off the bat, you can hear these oscillators just sound great. They're really, really warm, but also bright and biting. I find a lot of the time, a lot of analog oscillators tend to be more so dark, like on some of the newer Moogs, for example, whereas these oscillators, they're so powerful and they cut through the mix like nothing else, but they also have that wonderful instability that VCOs have. You hear how they're beating with each other there. So yeah, going into our oscillator section first. So VCO1 can go from a triangle to a square. We've got pulse width, of course. What I love is that you're able to create, even with just one oscillator, you're able to simulate what the sound of 2 oscillators would be together because of the fact that you can vary any sort of mixture between saw and square, and then affect pulse width, which will only affect the square side. It simulates almost 2 oscillators beating there together. So you can really get away with a lot of cool stuff where you can use the cross mod, which we'll get to later, but at the same time, you're not going to lose out on that fat sound because VCO1 on its own sounds so good. So we can also sync it. There's a little bit of stepping right now, but that's just to tune it chromatically. When you sweep it with a LFO or with a envelope, it's not there at all, so no problems. So moving on, let's add in some VCO2. Get them in tune. So just to highlight VCO2 for a second here, it has this wonderful triangle wave. Let's turn up release. This is honestly just a sound I use sometimes on its own. Just a beautiful sounding oscillator. So I do wish that VCO1 had a triangle wave as well, but that's all good. It's a small price to pay. So yeah, we can variate the shape here as well, from triangle through saw through square. So let's get a blend together of the two. Add some detune. Sounds incredible already. So VCO2 can also be used as an LFO, and you can turn off the keyboard tracking. We'll get to that more later when we add Xmod to this patch. So moving on to the mixer here, so we can add in a sub-oscillator. Awesome analog square wave, and also some noise. So the sub-oscillator we're not going to use for this particular patch, but suffice to say, it's awesome if you want to make some bass sounds. Sounds as good as any Moog I've heard. And yeah, something to note about the mixer. So the mixer, although it's not one of the highlighted features, it's a really interesting mixer where, similarly to the Moog Matriarch mixer, as you bring stuff forward in the mix, it doesn't just turn up the entire volume of the sound. It'll make certain oscillators more front forward. So something to be really wary of is if you're going to add in resonance with the filter, or add in distortion, or add in anything that's going to bring up the gain, consider turning your VCOs around halfway. Because if we have everything at full, it's already a really hot sound to begin with, and I don't think it adds any additional drive, but it definitely will eat up your headroom quickly. So I like to have my oscillators around 50%. Turn up the master here a bit. So we're going to use a little bit of noise in this patch. The OB6 really excels at these kind of like gritty, dirty, characterful, but beautiful sounds. And the white noise on this synth, it's a small thing to say, but it's probably the most usable white noise I've heard on a synthesizer. It's got a wonderful high pass filter on it, or whatever type of white noise they're generating. It doesn't have all that unnecessary bass frequencies. So it works fantastic to layer it in with your oscillators a little bit. So beautiful. Okay, so moving on to the star of the show, we've got our 12-pole filter. It's a variable state filter, completely smooth between low pass, notch, and high pass, pardon me, as well as it has a button to toggle band pass. So yeah, without exaggerating, this is the best filter on any synth I've ever used. With no resonance, 50% resonance. With 100% resonance. Watch your ears. That is the nicest sounding resonance I've ever heard on a filter, and no exaggeration at all. A lot of the times, filters, they allow you to go up to 100% resonance, but on something like the Korg Prologue or Novation Summit, you're never going to put it up to 100 resonance. It creates a shrill, painful sound that is pretty unusable musically. Whereas with this synthesizer, I find myself pretty frequently using 100% resonance to pick out these amazing harmonics. reverb. That filter is a work of art. Let's turn up reverb for now. So while this chord is holding, let's check out what makes this filter so special. The variable state motion of it. So basically, it allows you to transition smoothly between 3 different filters. Amazing stuff, and we can modulate that as well, which creates one of the most noticeable sound characters of any synth. Whenever I hear this sound on a synth patch, you know right away that it's either going to be an OB-6 or an Oberheim SEM, which this filter is based off of, the classic from the 70s, I believe. Yeah, so we also have a bandpass mode. Again, kind of keeping in the theme of this video with character and how much that matters. The bandpass filter on this is amazing. I'm not sure exactly what makes it nicer than regular bandpass filters, but on the Summit, for example, I rarely find myself making patches with the bandpass filter, either in 12 dB or 24 dB mode, whereas this one, it's got this really, really nice, lush texture to it. Something to note is the bandpass will really kill your gain, so you got to make sure that you do turn up the volume either from program volume or master volume whenever you do use the bandpass filter. But yeah, so going on here, let's dial in a filter amount that we like. We're gonna keep it in low pass for now. Okay, moving on to the envelopes. So we've got first our amplitude loudness envelope, pretty basic stuff, but full ADSR, which is nice. We're gonna leave it as is for now. We do have a button for velocity, which is great. It is very nice. You know, in terms of the fixed amount that it makes the filter result and work with velocity, I probably would have preferred a slider for that, but the ratio is nice and I do find it very useful. So no problem there. We've got our amount if we just want to turn off the VCA. And yeah, there we go. And then we got our filter envelope here, which is, again, with how it interacts with the filter and the Xmod section, this is where we start to see the magic of the OB6. So let's go ahead and dial some of that in. Make sure to have release up. And then we'll make that velocity sensitive. And then here, let's add some of that wonderful resonance. Dial it back a little bit, and we're starting to get the classic OB sound. Sounding beautiful. Let's add a little bit of attack on that. Maybe some sustain. And then going over to the side here, we've got an amazing feature, the pan spread. Listen to this on headphones. Very beautiful stuff. So we're gonna hold a chord here. So let's dial that back a bit. If we want pure mono, just like a classic mono synth, or if we want fully wide, we can do whatever we like there. Cool. We're gonna leave it about halfway for now. Here we've got an adjustable program volume, which is great if you want to, if you have a really loud patch and you're trying to make it not jump in volume between your other patches, and a master volume here, nothing too special. And then let's move over here. So now we're going to look at the modulation section. So the OB6 does only have one LFO, but in keeping with this video's theme about how character matters more than features, I almost never find myself wishing it had a second LFO. The LFO is also only one global LFO. It's not per voice. You could make an argument that it would have been better with an LFO per voice, but that's why we have crossmod. So what I like to do with my LFO is either have it modulate pulse width, which I don't think we have too much. There we go. For something subtle, or if we want to do VCO modulation to get that dreamy effect. We can also do both as well. Another cool trick is using the amplitude. Really, really beautiful stuff. Let's turn that off for now. I think we're gonna leave it on pulse width actually. That's sounding really nice. Again, with this synthesizer, less is more. A lot of the time the modulation, you don't need to go overboard. Like we can route the mod wheel or the initial amount of the LFO as much as we want and really go overboard with it. But I like it somewhere subtle like this. Cool. Awesome. So we've got our speed here. Can go well into the audio rates. We've got our shapes here. Let's do something more obvious. Some sample and hold. Square. Reverse sawtooth. Awesome. A cool tip to use is that if you put... Let's turn this off for a sec. If you put the LFO on square and then turn up the mod wheel 100%, it's going to result in going up an entire octave. So you can create some pretty cool modulation if you have one of the VCO pitches being modified, and then we have the octave up. Let's play around with this. Very nice if you want to do something a little bit more obvious, but like I mentioned, I like the subtle stuff here. Beautiful. Okay, and now moving on to the X mod, which is one of the most interesting features of the synth here. So the X mod allows you to decouple VCO2 or use the envelope from the filter and create even more modulation. So what we're going to do, let's decouple VCO2 for now. So we're going to turn off VCO2, turn it into a low frequency mode. You can hear what that sounds like here. Hear the clicks. And then with keyboard on, each of these clicks will be relative to the pitch of the key. So we can get a really interesting effect where basically the higher up the keyboard you go, the modulation will go faster. If we just want another LFO, just a normal one, we can turn off the keyboard and have it just be essentially an LFO per voice. So for now, let's leave the keyboard on. Let's go change that to a triangle so we get some smooth modulation, and let's hear what that sounds like. Let's turn off the noise for now. Right? So really cool stuff here. So if we wanted to just go and do that subtly. Beautiful. What I really like to use with this one is modulating between a bandpass filter and the normal filter is really cool. Beautiful. So now we're starting to get into that classic OB territory. Let's just dial in a patch here. And we can also use with the filter envelope, we can do some more stuff here. Play some nice keys here. maybe turn off the filter envelope for now. So beautiful here. So while we're holding a chord, let's bring in the final bit of magic here. So we'll cover the rest of the synth, but this is a great time to talk about the newest addition to the OB6 and what truly transports it to the all-time greats, in my opinion. The Prophet 5 reissue has what's called the vintage knob, which allows you to basically change a whole bunch of parameters such as filter position, each oscillator's pitch, the envelope, decay, sustain, release randomly based on how much you add, which emulates kind of the instability of old synthesizers. So with the Prophet 6 and OB6, Dave Smith recently added this same feature to these synthesizers. So by going to global settings, and then another page of global settings, you're actually able to change your detune knob into the vintage knob. Now watch what this does to the sound. It's subtle. It's a little hard to hear. We'll experiment with more of that in some patch settings later on, but once you know what to listen for, this is the magic knob here because it makes everything just slightly unstable. I like to have it usually about halfway, but we can try with different settings here. Makes everything slightly unstable and makes each of the VCOs quite unique. Let's go here. Beautiful and unstable. So moving on, a couple more ways the synth is really expressive. We've got our aftertouch, which is the easiest way to implement aftertouch I've ever seen. Let's turn this off for a sec so we can hear. Not to mention, this is probably the nicest feeling keyboard. Awesome. That's a beautiful sounding patch already. Remember, this is completely dry with no effects too. Cool. Awesome. So let's keep going here. So we've got our transpose button. Really nice and handy to have it right there above the mod wheel. We've got our wheel range, which I really like that this is on the front panel, because sometimes if I'm making a funk bass, I want to be able to have it go down an octave. And then all the other times, I just want to go to my standard 2 up and down. Very nice that it's on the front panel there. We've got a whole bunch of different key modes here. So I like to use LAS, meaning last note priority a lot of the time. Great if you're running lead lines, but you also can go into, I'm not sure what LAR stands for, but basically it makes the envelope trigger every single time. And then we've already been hearing it here, but we can turn Unison mode off, get chords, turn it on. The OB6 becomes a very capable bass synth. And one of the coolest features of the Unison mode is how it pairs with the vintage knob now. So what we can do here is if we take the Unison knob and we add in all 6 voices. Now, watch what the vintage knob is going to do here. Let's turn up some resonance, turn up the attack here. So it's a nice sound, but it's very much together. Basically, what it sounds like right now is all the VCOs are very closely in tune. There's still a little bit of magic because, they are VCOs. They're never going to be perfect. And that's why you're not hearing any sort of, gross phasing or anything like that.
But now watch as we turn this up. There's the Tom Sawyer sound. That sound alone for me is enough to justify the price of admission for this thing. Listen to the complex harmonic content going on there. And what the vintage knob is doing, it's slightly putting every single envelope just slightly off. So they all kind of go back down at different times, creating this amazing cascade. It's actually the nicest sounding in mono. So let's check that out. Versus without vintage knob. I mean, it's just amazing. Cool. So there's also a chord mode. I find I don't use this that much, but it's there if you want it. So basically, you just go. Cool. Yeah, I mean, right on its own, the OB6 is an incredibly capable mono synth because of the cross mod and the Unison stack and just how damn good each of its features sounds. I find myself using this way more for basses than I originally thought. But anyways, going back to where we were. So where was our sound at? Let's check this out. Go back down a little bit there. Beautiful already. Okay, cool. So yeah, that's a pretty good overview of the type of sounds I would make on there. So what we'll do here, we'll just play around with this a little bit now, adding in some effects. So the OB6 has its own built-in effects. And while I will say this is probably a weak part of the OB6, the effects are still fine. They're still good to have there. What we'll hear later on when I'm demoing sounds and what you actually heard in the beginning is I really like the Valhalla Shimmer reverb with the OB6. I bought that for $50 and it sounds, in my humble opinion, way better than anything on board this synth or almost any other synth for that matter. Other than the Korg Prologue and the Novation Summit, I'm never too interested in onboard reverbs and delays from hardware synths. The software is usually just better. But yeah, let's check out some of these effects. So turn off the vintage knob to half. Okay, cool. So yeah, we've got our reverbs. Got a nice hall one. Oh, one sec. Got room. Plate. Spring tank. I find the hall one is definitely the most usable. So let's dial in the amount. And I forgot what this other parameter is. I find the hall one is most usable. So let's dial in the parameters here. They're very basic parameters, usually some form of like rate or size. And then you've got your mix here. Yeah, so that's fine for now. Okay, a little bit less. And then some of the other effects are actually pretty interesting. So we've got our BBD delay or digital delay. Chorus. And some other interesting ones like phasers, flangers. Ring mod's kind of cool. The ring mod and phaser 3 are probably the two most high quality ones. But yeah, as you can tell, there's plenty of effects there. I use them bypassed 99% of the time. The only effect I actually use is hidden, in fact. There's an incredible analog distortion by holding down effect and then turning up the mix. Things get pretty loud pretty fast. I usually leave it around like 6 or 7, and it just adds a nice kind of analog grit. There's also finally an arpeggiator. Pretty basic, but sounds good. You've got your clock and all sorts of different time divisions. And then there's a very basic but nice step sequencer that you can use to play things and then play over them. Anyway, nothing too incredible there, but gets the job done. I very infrequently use the arpeggiator or the step sequencer. Again, that's pretty much the synth, and this is pretty much a great example of the kinds of patches I make with it. So before we jump into some sounds, and including this one and others, let's just go over some pros and cons. So starting with the bad first, not that there's that much of it, but cons, I would say, if you're trying to get a synth that has an amazing built-in effects engine, I would look elsewhere like the Summit or the Prologue. The effects are they're fine, but for what it's worth, these effects will never make it onto a Miles Away song. I never ever record with them. I always record this synth completely dry, oftentimes in mono actually, because I like how vintage it sounds with just the mono inputs. But mono or stereo, completely dry, no effects. I always do my processing in the box after. Second con, I would say the arpeggiator and the sequencer, they're fine, but they're just kind of there. I would have honestly preferred maybe if the R&D time had gone towards making maybe a second filter, like a high pass filter, or a second low pass filter, or even a couple more voices. Not that it needs them, but if they had just cut the arpeggiator and the sequencer, I wouldn't have been sad. And then final con that I guess you could say is only 6 voices. Although this does feel more like an interesting and fun limitation than a con, because occasionally you will get voice stealing, but if you embrace it and just kind of add it to the character of the sound, like you can hear the voices get stolen throughout there, but it to me, it never really bothers me because it adds to that vintage and retro sound. The Prophet 5, one of the most famous synths of all time, only ever had 5 voices. So if you even want to call it that, that would be my only other con. As for the pros, you've already been hearing it, but the sound of this synth is just phenomenal. Remember, we're hearing this completely dry again. Incredible sounding synth. You can just do anything on this synth and it will sound good. It's one of those really rewarding synthesizers where it makes you feel like you're a better sound designer than you are, because almost anything you touch on this will make it sound good. So that's number 1, sound is everything. Number 2, and why I wanted to make this video in the first place, is character. This synth just drips character, especially once we get the detune vintage knob up. It just sounds like something like it's a relic from a bygone era. I keep getting distracted just playing this patch. But yeah, number 3, the oscillator section is my favorite oscillator section on any synthesizer, because of the fact that it allows you to independently vary the shape and the pulse width smoothly. So what that allows for, like we mentioned, is those awesome layered sounds where you're getting half of a static sawtooth VCO and half of a square wave that's having pulse width modulation. So it really interestingly creates the sound of 2 oscillators playing at once. So in a certain way, it's almost like you have 4 VCOs by doing that. And I also just love the fact that they make it so easy to do cross modulation and oscillator FM. We didn't even go into that, but we'll look into that with some of the patches where if we turn off low frequency mode, we can actually very smoothly create some really nice FM bells and glassy plucks with this. The FM on this just sounds amazing. Analog FM is hard to get right, but the cross mod section on here is a work of art. I've never played a Prophet 5, but I've heard it's amazing on that as well. So I'm glad to hear they carried over the lineage. Pro number 3, nicest feeling keyboard I own. I'm by no means a professional piano player, but this just feels awesome. The only keyboard that comes close that I have is the Moog Matriarch. This is a full FATAR keyboard. I never even feel like I need more than 49 keys, but it's just a joy to play. So great master keyboard for your studio. And then final pro, which is just a huge one for me because I spend my whole day looking at computers. I do all my music within Logic. I love the fact that there's no screen on this thing. Something with the Novation Summit that I've started to get frustrated with, my other synth I spend probably as much time with as this, as it's my main workhorse, is just constantly being in that screen and constantly doing parameter modulation. For example, in the Summit, cross mod For example, in the Summit, Aftertouch involves going into a menu and modulating the amount through a menu system. Here, it's as simple as let's make the pitch with Aftertouch. Done. Let's make the loudness with Aftertouch. Done. It's that easy, right? So that's a huge bonus for me. I find the workflow on this synth, once you know where everything is, it's the fastest workflow of any synth I've used. And it honestly makes me want to get more into sequential stuff because before this is my first sequential instrument and I never really understood the hype before, but now I fully get it. So in conclusion, before we jump into sounds, I'm going to go ahead and give the OB-6 a rating of absolute future classic. I'd say along with the Moog Matriarch, this is tied for my favorite synth I own, and it's going to be literally on every single Miles Away release going forward. So yeah, thanks again for watching. Remember to hit that like button and subscribe if you like this content, and let's check out some sounds.
So in the end, guys, I hope that this video has showed you guys why I believe that the character of synths is so much more important than the feature set. The amount of LFOs doesn't matter. The amount of envelopes doesn't matter. When a synth sounds like this and makes you inspired to play it and inspired to write music, that's what it's all about in the end. Thanks so much for watching, guys. This has been Miles Away, and I'll see you guys in the next video.